Hello, I am here today with MySandySpringsTV.com and welcome to the Chattahoochee Nature Center. My name is Lisa, I'm the horticulturalist here, and I am very excited to tell you about an upcoming hike that I have on November 19th. I will be giving a presentation on tree and forest folklore, and as you can see, I'm standing under a beautiful sourwood tree here. This is one of my favorite spots at the Nature Center. My presentation is an interesting mixture of identification of trees, as well as maybe medicinal uses or the way that they've been used for food, as well as some interesting standpoints on ecological value of the trees, how they contribute to the forest life of animals, of other plants, and of us as humans. And my favorite part, I'm going to be telling you the myths, the stories, and the folklore related to the trees. Now, the stories that I give will come anywhere from ancient European stories to Celtic and Druid nods to Native American stories, and even our current American kind of take on these ancient mythological motifs that you commonly see when you read into things like world folklore. So I hope that you will join us on November 19th. These trails are going to be illuminated, and it's just going to be a very special hike where we can kind of delve into and engage ourselves in the spirits of the tree and the forest. So come on over with me and we'll go over to a grove of beech trees, and I'll give you a glimpse into what this presentation is going to be all about on November 19th. So here we are in a beech grove, and beech trees are actually very common in our woodlands. You probably have them growing throughout your yard. This is Mackenzie Begley here, and she was mentioning to me that she has beech trees growing in her yard. So very, very common in this region of Georgia is this tree. Now, the beech tree is a wonderful tree. It's actually one of my favorite trees, and there's very easy ways that you can identify it. So if you look at the bark here, one thing you'll notice, especially if you feel the bark, is it doesn't really feel like any other tree in the forest. It's very, very smooth. The bark is very thin, almost like a skin. And it's this ghostly steel gray is another very common way that you can identify it, especially in the wintertime when you come out here and there's not much going on. The beech tree is going to be very easy to identify because of that factor. Now, another interesting thing and an easy way to identify the beech tree is by looking at the leaves. They're held out very laterally from the tree, and they also never drop their leaves the entire winter time. So out in the, well, they're not quite evergreen because they actually do change color. They start out in the fall changing into like a deep tanned leather color. And then as the winter progresses, they never fall off the tree. So between that color? No, actually when the sun shines down on them and it rains, it actually bleaches the leaves and makes them look a lighter orange until they get paler and paler and turn almost just a pale, pale yellow. Now, when the new leaves emerge and the forest starts to grow again in the spring, those new leaves that are coming out unfurl and they literally push the old leaves off. So if you go on a hike in the late winter time and you go up and down our trails, you'll notice all of a sudden when things start to grow, the forest floor is carpeted in this beautiful display of these yellow orange leaves all over the place. So that's another way to identify it. Now, the beech tree will live to be 300 to 400 years old. And as you can imagine, Mackenzie, probably a tree that's 400 years old would be very big, very fat, that's right. And because they would get so huge and they never lose their leaves, they end up making a forest that's predominantly covered in beech trees. It makes them look very dark, very enchanted, and so there's all sorts of stories and mythology related to the beech tree forest of ancient. So stories that you would find that talk about the beech tree forest would be the Grimm fairy tales, which you probably know some of those. Red Riding Hood, when she went into the dark forest, she was actually entering into a beech forest. Robin Hood and his merry men, if you know those. Where did Robin Hood and his merry men live?
in a beech tree.
Well, they actually did. They lived up in the trees. And so they lived in oak trees and beech trees. And they could hide very well there because the leaves never came down in the winter time. You also have stories like the hobbits. They lived next to a beech forest. And then in Winnie the Pooh, the little piglet actually lived at the base of a beech tree. So Piglet would live somewhere in between these nice roots here. The root system of the beech tree is also very interesting. There's a lot of mythology related to the monsters of the forest. And if you use your imagination and say this beech tree was 400 years old and just massive, and you looked at the root system, they kind of come down almost like the toes of an elephant or something.
And legs. And they kind of look like tiny legs.
Well, that's exactly right. So you get a lot of mythology about mystical creatures that are living in the beech forest, whether the beech trees themselves are mystical creatures or whether they live down at the base of the tree too. Now, one more thing that's really interesting about the beech tree is that people really like to carve into it. And again, that's because it has this beautiful, nice skin-type bark here. So maybe you'll find the initials of a loved one or something like that carved in there. Very, very common. You can also see when animals have climbed the trees. Maybe if a bear has climbed the trees, you can see claw marks on it. And an interesting association with the beech tree and with Anglo-Saxon word roots is that the same root for beech tree and the same word for book are of the same origin. So another interesting thing, Mackenzie, if you want to try this out, is when you rip a beech leaf, it actually sounds like ripping paper. You kind of hear how that sounds like paper being ripped?
Yeah.
So that's another way that you can identify it. So the forests are full of these wonderful stories of all this mythology, from Native Americans to Celtic and Druid to our current American lore that we tell in books and in movies. And so I really hope that you can come out and join us on our Tree and Forest Folklore hike on November 19th, and maybe you can learn something new about the forest. Thank you.